Let me just put the advert. Greetings, family. We have a special guest in the house with my brother Dean O'Kee. I'm gonna, you know what? Because she's looking so good, I'm gonna allow her to introduce herself, you know, and let the public get to know what this beautiful lady does and what she's about.
Thank you very much for having me. My name is Verene Shpherd. I'm a professor of social history. I also used to be the director of the Institute for Gender and Development Studies at the University of the West Indies. So I do have an interest in the history of gender issues and the contemporary working out of gender issues. I am the director of the Center for Reparation Research at the University of the West Indies. I'm the host of Talking History on Nationwide 90 FM. And I'm one of the vice chairs of the CARICOM Reparation Commission and one of the vice chairs of the UN Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. And I'm from St. Mary, Jamaica.
Okay. Uncle Dean, introduce yourself, brother.
Good evening, sir. Good evening. First of all, it's great to be speaking with Dr. Verene this evening, Professor Verene. I am Dean OKAI Senior, the acting chair of APAC, the African Diaspora Political Action Committee. Our role within the United Kingdom is to connect the entire diaspora of 3 million, represent our interests across education, economics, housing, employment, health, and trade and industry. We do have a special place for reparation, and we will discuss that this evening. And when me and Professor Verene speak offline, we'll speak about connecting our strategies for executing reparations, which are on the table at this point because we have more leverage than we've ever had. However, what we will discuss is the only thing that the banking institutions fear.
Okay. So, sister, I want you to able to give us a background of yourself, as you know, some people like to know the history of where you're coming from and explaining, you know, as you're from Jamaica, the works that have got you to where you are today.
Yes, well, I was born in a very rural district of St. Mary, Jamaica. In fact, because of the infrastructure, the poor infrastructural development of that community, people who stereotype Africa call the community Africa. It was Hopewell, but they called it Africa. So from very early, I was introduced to discrimination because I asked my mother, my late mother, why is the district called Africa when actually my father said the land title was Hopewell. And so she became my first history teacher, explaining to me that it was the stereotypical representation and misunderstanding of the continent of Africa, why people did that. Because in the imagination of most people at the time, Africa was poor, disenfranchised, infrastructurally challenged, and they stereotyped the entire continent, all the countries of the continent like that. So I went to school, St. Mary High School, and again, I was, I observed discrimination. You can see that my hair is not long, straight, and blonde. And some of the teachers showed preference for the children who were brown and had long hair at graduations and so on. They were the ones giving the flowers to the guest speakers. And so I grew up in a society that was post-colonial in one sense in terms of the political nature of Jamaica after 62, but which was really pro-colonial in its ideologies, and a society that had not liberated itself, as Bob Marley urged us to do, and Marcus Garvey, from mental enslavement. So, and then I studied history because I realized that history, as Marcus Garvey says, is a landmark by which we are directed into the true course of life. And Nelson Mandela has said, and we are, of course, today marking Nelson Mandela's International Day, that you can't be proud of yourself if you don't know your history. So I studied history, and I have not been the same after studying history. I studied history at Shortwood Teachers College. I studied history at the University of the West Indies. I did my bachelor's, my master's, and my PhD. I did my PhD. I got a scholarship to the University of Cambridge. Again, I experienced discrimination in the United Kingdom. So I thought that history was the best way for me to understand the past, and it gave me direction for the future. Elsa Gavile, who was a Guyanese, the first professor of history at the University of the West Indies, always said that our history is not dead knowledge. It is important for us because it's a signpost for the future. So that it is as a historian that I have been digging into the past, excavating our people's history from deep layers of distortion and passing that knowledge on. So it's because of history why I have gotten the opportunities that I've gotten in life at the United Nations or, in CARICOM and so on. So I've used history to teach. I now have a radio program called Talking History, as I said. And my life's work is to help our people to understand the roots of our culture, where we're coming from, why it is that so many of us do not want to anchor ourselves to the African past and other means of unfreedom to which we are connected. And history has the evidence that we need to fight for reparation. And so I have also been trying to look into my own family. I know that on my mother, I did my DNA test. On my mother's side, we're connected to Cameroon and to the Tikar people. So I'm proud of that. And also I have managed to trace my first enslaved ancestor to Alexander Mighty, who was enslaved, he was born in 1829 and enslaved in St. Catherine, Jamaica. And of course, he perhaps just escaped the apprenticeship system that the British colonizers imposed rather than fully free all of our ancestors. So I hope that gives you and your viewers a sense of who I am and why I do what I do, regardless of the education. The education, the certification has been a means of entering spaces so that I can do what I want to do.
Okay. So I wanted to ask, in forms of the history, because, I've been talking a lot to a lot of people and looking at the aspect that we are all one people, regardless of where we're from or how we find ourselves. But in today's world, in forms of, like in the Caribbean, let's put it as a broader thing, because some people try to pull themselves away from certain saying, I belong here or I belong there, or I'm not involved with these people, or, how do you find the people that are taking this new information that you're giving out?
We're one people. That's the first thing. We have been separated because of the transatlantic trafficking in enslaved Africans. Our ancestors were moved here. And we know that because we have the evidence. We have a database which shows us the names of the ships, you know, their owners, who are these traffickers and enslavers. So we know that we're one people. We know we have come from the same origins in Africa. We were just dropped off at different points in the world. So that's the first thing we have to understand and come together in a collective movement for Black empowerment. And we're seeing how the Black Lives Matter movement has been globalized. And I think that's a good thing. So in the Caribbean, what we are doing, I'm not the only one to be doing this. We have a proud and long history of what I call Scholar-Activism and a joined up approach of the scholars, that is those who are trained in tertiary institutions, secondary institutions, and have gone on to become lecturers and so on. The scholars and grassroots people, Rastafari, grassroots people. There's a movement in the Caribbean now, joining up everyone. But we have a long history of scholar activism from Walter Rodney. Walter Rodney, I think, is the best example of somebody in the Caribbean who tried to unite people from all classes and ethnic groups. And some people believe that that's one of the reasons he was considered by some people to be quote unquote dangerous, because he was trying to say to Africans, Indians, you know, indigenous people, this is our history. We have been colonized and we have to fight for justice, but it requires all of us. And so the scholar activists have been teaching, yes, at University of the West Indies, but also practicing the groundings with the children, with brothers and sisters right across the region. And that's the work that the Center for Reparation Research does at the moment, following Walter Rodney's grounding as a process of conscientization and dissemination of our history and our experiences. Walter Rodney said at first, he self-identified as a guerrilla intellectual. And then he said he transformed himself after meeting Pat into a revolutionary intellectual, because he thought it was necessary not just to teach at UWI, but to also go into the spaces and be revolutionary, even in what he taught, the way he taught history. Remember, he was the one who wrote How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. And along with Capitalism and Slavery from Eric Williams, you know, provided us with the rationale for the reparation movement, along with others like Sir Arthur Lewis, and even going back to politicians like Sir Ellis Clark and so on. So we have that tradition. And the CARICOM Reparation Commission is composed of the chairs of national committees right across the Caribbean. And it's not just in the former British colonies. We have links with the French Caribbean, the French colonized Caribbean, the Danish colonized Caribbean, that is the US Virgin Islands. And we have members from Suriname, colonized by the Dutch. So, and we have counterparts, we have relationships with the UK and with people in Africa, Asia, Australia, and the EU countries. So it's a broad coalition we're trying to build. And the USA, of course, we have a relationship with the National African American Reparation Commission. So scholars in the Caribbean, politicians in the Caribbean, grassroots people in the Caribbean, we're all trying to come together. And the center is entering its third year. It will be 3 years in October. It was established to be the research arm of the CARICOM Reparation Commission, which was established in 2013. But we are conscious that we stand on the shoulders of so many others who went before, who are fighting for justice.
Okay. So, in like at the moment where there is groups of alliances going for reparations, like in America, they've got this thing that they call ADOS. But are you aware of the old one, which was before that, which they called Cobra?
And Cobra, yes, of course, yes. No, we don't work with ADOS.
Yeah.
Because ADOS is going in the direction of a nationalist group. We cannot support that, because I'm saying that we're searching for unity. So anything that is divisive, we can't enter that, because that is going to dissipate our energies. ADOS, from my understanding, if I understand this correctly, and I know some of the people who are there, the view is that if and when reparation comes in the United States, it should be only for African Americans, narrowly defined. And they have gone as far, as I understand it, to say Caribbean people who are immigrants into that country are not entitled to reparation, because they're not nationals. They're not in the U.S. narrowly defined citizenry. We beg to differ, because the research we have done from the public database of Professor David Eltis and others is that the data show that the United States, under the flag of the U.S., ships went to Africa and bought enslaved Africans, forcefully relocated them in the Caribbean. So it's not only that they forcefully relocated our ancestors to the United States of America, they traffic people to the Caribbean, including Jamaica. We have evidence of all of those ships. There are many, many ships. We have the evidence. We extracted the data from the Eltis database. So if Caribbean people are now in the United States, then it means that they are the descendants. They could be the descendants of those who were trafficked here and who went to the United States. So they are as entitled as anybody else to reparatory justice there. So we prefer to work with the National African American Reparation Commission. Ron Daniels is in that group. Dr. Don Rojas, and we have been keeping abreast of what's happening with HR 40, the reparation bill that is being John Conyers and Sheila Jackson Lee, Congresswoman. They piloted that. And Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, she's the one working on it now, because we knew that John Conyers had to withdraw from that process. So, and in the UK, I mean, I have been there on 1st of August, for example, in Brixton, in Windrush Square, as it is called now. And we have the National Council on Reparation has sent a delegation to the UK. And I think Stephen Golding also went subsequently, working with Sister Esther Stanford Zoshi, Brother Glenroy Watson, and others. And we went to Liverpool, Birmingham, just to see how we can have a discussion about a joined up movement, because we need you in the UK to be in this movement, and because you are entitled to reparation, and the people you have left behind in the Caribbean, your family in the Caribbean, also deserve reparation. But you are in a very good position. You're right there, and you can lobby for reparatory justice, but in an inclusive way.
Okay. Brother Dean, informed of your understanding of what our sister has said, in forms of the reparation and what your party, sorry about saying party, committee is trying to do. How can you explain or reflect that in how to connecting with Jamaica and in creating forms of an alliance? Because we need to unite across the board. So give the sister a kind of idea of what you do.
Absolutely. So ADPAC is about bringing our collective interests together. We do have a cryptocurrency and we do have a blockchain. What we're is creating what we intend to be the official African digital identity so that no Western nations can turn us off. At the same time, what we want to do is put that repertory list of companies and families who traded in our people onto the blockchain across all of the islands. So that would go across Barbados, Guyana, all of the Caribbean islands, South American islands, including Jamaica, onto the blockchain so that we can attach that to our own repertory courts of justice. We have delivery partners now who are establishing sovereign jurisdictions in African nations. And it's very important that we grant ourselves our own licenses for not only our repertory courts, but also our own banking institutions that can become repertory banks. It's very important that we have repertory banks that represent our interests because we need receiving houses. We've not really thought about what this looks like in practical and tangible terms when we actually do have the leverage, which I would say we are 12 to 24 months from having. And the conditions that it takes to set are not those to be discussed online, because these are why they kill our people. The most frightening thing for them is when we have the absolute leverage, which is concrete, to force their hand. And at this juncture, we do have the strategy, and I will share it with Professor Verene offline.
Okay.
We have it. Yeah, we absolutely have it. And it isn't one for public discourse, because this is why people, number one, lose their lives.
Yes.
Number two, we inform our adversaries of our every move, and we must conceal our intentions. We must connect the banking entity, the repertory courts, and the reparations movement. Those three are the trisecta that will force their hand. And when it comes down to it, at the end of the day, it won't be by force, but by negotiation, what is released for us to advance our people. Because what I'm saying is, based on the strategy we have, we know it's an absolute, and that is when we will be in the room to negotiate. And it goes beyond the individual. It's at an institutional level, from institution to institution, where this must be negotiated and indeed released. What we do is we have a history of following avatars. But let me ask you a question, and this is a very specific question now. What do individuals or avatars have to do with infrastructure, nation building, and the progress of our people? Absolutely nothing. But we are and have been very emotional people, very reactionary people, and very predictable people. And it's based on that they've been able to circumvent our progress, and we haven't been able to circumvent the detrimental condition that we have allowed them to place us in. Everything that we have done has a degree of we have to, in effect, enable our adversaries to place us in this position. And at this juncture in our history, it's undeniable. We've been in Britain since the Windrush en masse for 71 years. How is it that we have failed to create the infrastructure that would enable us to have self-determination in terms of banking, even down to traditional cultural banking, which is a partner system? It's ridiculous. And now in the era of apps and the digital revolution, there is no excuse. Even in terms of work that ADPAC has done over the past 14 weeks, we have our own CRM tool that we're about to release Friday week. Now that means we have our own internal communication platform for grassroots organizations to plug into. And we will extend this to you, Sister Verene, so that the reparations movements, as you stand across nations, can plug into one tool where you'll be able to edit documents concurrently with permission sets, share data, and have an internal communication tool that can't be seen by our external adversaries. It's very important that we do this work and we create the platforms and the tools to have self-determination. This is what we've been working on for the past 14 weeks. And it's not money, it's human will as opposed to human one. We have an entire tech team who are working on the embryonic stages of an African operating system. So the Chinese have shown us the way with Huawei, their phones, and they have an operating system that creates sustainable employment and development for their own Chinese corporations, right? So why wouldn't we do exactly the same? And it's only based on self-esteem. All power is self-appointed. The only reason that power has any validity is based on our observation and acknowledgement of that power. Why don't we acknowledge our own power?
If I could just say quickly that the history of Black people in the UK predates Windrush, goes way back.
Of course.
Yes.
Of course.
And so your question becomes even more valid if you think about that. And I don't know, I only lived there continuously, like for 2 years. I spent 1 year of my PhD years researching in Jamaica, so maybe 2 years. On and off, I've been going there. I don't know what is the answer to your question about the division, the divisiveness over all these years, these centuries. I don't know if island divisions, you know, I don't know if that's a factor, because people in the UK, as elsewhere in Europe and so, are from different Caribbean territories. And I know sometimes people coalesce around that. I would hope that by now that has broken down, because people would have seen that it doesn't matter where you're from, as long as you're Peter. I'm thinking of Peter Tosh right now. No matter where you come from, as long as you're black, you're an African. So
absolutely,
that's how we're seen. So it makes sense for us to come together. But I don't want to discuss too much about what you have said on air, based on your cautionary note about public engagement. But off air, I will put you in touch with somebody on our side who will be very interested in what you are doing, because there is also a conversation going on here, led by that person, about cryptocurrency and about financial institutions that would be unique to African people and so on. So I think that he'll be very, very interested in the conversation and in the projects that you just described.
Yeah.
But that's for off air, as you said.
Absolutely. And you know, the key is to understanding that as a sovereign people, we make that decision. And that goes across tech, banking, and every area of life that we engage in. And even though you've said we would come to this understanding, we haven't, because unfortunately, due to the indoctrination, we are emotionally embroiled to the training that we've had. And even those who've gone through what they would perceive as education, it's merely training. And training is for a particular position. Education is a lifelong pursuit that enables you to circumnavigate the waters of life successfully.
But the content of history education in the UK is troubling.
Absolutely.
When I was chair of the working group of experts on people of African descent, we conducted what we call country visits, and I led a country visit to the UK, and had dialogue with the Minister of Education, the MP, who has portfolio responsibility for education, and we heard also from people on the ground, young people, about the content of the syllabus, and it does not prepare children to understand that the history of Britain is wrapped up in the history of the Caribbean and vice versa. There's no separate history, certainly not from 1655. And then after the bicentennial in 2007, there was some, there was some public statements made about changing the curriculum and ensuring that the history of slavery is taught. Now, that is not satisfactory, because if you tell children that their history started with slavery, it makes them ashamed based on how slavery is conceptualized. It has to be about African history. It has to be about Britain's responsibility for that history. And it has to be about the great empires and the systems we had in Africa before they were actually stolen and copied, about the great artifacts. When I went to West Benin and I saw the heads and all the culture there, I said to myself, only a wicked set of people would spread the propaganda that African people had no culture and they were not civilized. The same thing for the indigenous people. As I traveled through Latin America and I saw the products, and I have lots of them in my house at the moment, and also from the continent, different African countries, you cannot see this culture and say it was inferior. Look how many things have been borrowed from Africa and from indigenous peoples across the world. So we have to teach a kind of history that is empowering. And reparation cannot be presented as an act of begging, which is sometimes what happens. So negotiation is not begging. Negotiation is a two-way process to say, let us sit down. It's almost like, a treaty table after wars. Yeah?
Absolutely.
But the victors must, in other words, those of us who have survived, we must negotiate on behalf of our ancestors, and also negotiate for today, because we are living the legacies of colonialism. So what is taught needs to be reshaped to be more empowering, and also that everyone can understand the root causes of racism, the manifestations of racism, anti-Black racism. We have to understand the psychological trauma that our people went through, because if these understandings are not there, then, and if the teachers are not trained, then we're going to continue in this fractured state and have more mental illnesses and so on, because people are just too traumatized. They don't understand their society. They don't have anything to fall back on. So there's a lot of work to be done, but we have to have that unity. We have to have that. We have to break down the island country differences and understand that our goal, we must be focused, because a divided and powerless and weak people will never get reparation.
Well, number one, when it comes to the reparations question, the negotiation won't come from our part. The negotiation will come from their part. And the negotiation will come from their part based on the position they're placed in. And this is the conversation we'll have offline. In terms of education, no power willingly capitulates, and neither will the British education system. So we don't rely on that. But what we do rely on are those of us of a similar ilk who are creating a critical mass of coming together in being able to work across the board. So take, for instance, I'm the business development manager of a charity named Access UK, which my brother Nana Ajiman established. Now, he established this charity after doing a piece of work around the 2011 uprising after Mark Duggan was assassinated by police. And he was commissioned by the company he was working for at the time to see exactly, excuse me, why the young people uprose in the way that they did. And the conclusions that he came to were around deprivation, not being included in society. And off the back of that, he established Access UK. So what we do together at this stage is not only create training and employment programs, but also we have a structured leadership program for young men between 18 and 24, which is a 6-month structured leadership program, which we call succession plan. Because what we traditionally do is come to a position which is by default rather than design, where we are leaders, and it's a very lonely road. This is designed for 10 young men, and we are designing with ladies the female counterpart to this, where they will be an alumni of 10, which are a lifelong support for each other. And this specific program around reparations, they will be trained in to act as a team alongside their other leadership roles, which are structured. And we've identified state funding to pay for this. And we've acquired state funding to pay for the introduction, which is the first 6 weeks of this training program. So these are things that not only we've already acquired funding for, we spoke with 4 huge corporate companies over the last 2 weeks, and their corporate social responsibility to donate money to these training programs, which we now have, which will be formal and repeated year in, year out. And our aim is to produce 100 of these leaders a year. These are very powerful entities. And then we start the international exchange of these personnel and identify the mentors of these young men and women.
So, among the companies being approached, well, let me reframe that question. Are you approaching the companies that have come forward to confess their participation in the transatlantic trafficking, or in business, banking, financial and insurance business, and they have said they are going to engage in a repatriate justice conversation? With whom are they having the conversation? How do you enter that conversation? I'm thinking of the Bank of England, Lloyds of London, the pub chain Green King, and so on.
Yeah, you're 110% correct. And when we are, you see, at this stage, these meetings aren't anymore for public discourse. Okay. And what we tend to do as a people is we do a lot for optics when we've passed the time of optics, and it's about the time of function. Yeah. Even in terms of the reparations march, which is where I saw you, I think 2 years ago, standing and speaking outside in Parliament Square next to Esther Costa Soze. And
no, I don't,
so much.
I don't think that was me though. I was in Brixton. But another colleague of mine was there a couple years ago.
Yeah. But there is so much done for optics that we negate to organize at a professional level across the board with all skill sets on a frequent basis. Look, what we have to do at this stage is turn problems into projects with milestones and introduce personnel, policies and procedures to execute those milestones so that we come to the logical conclusion that we're supposed to. And based on the frequency of our meetings, that would be a fact. But we do so much for the optics, and the optics are the least important component of what we're supposed to do.
Okay, I think that conversation, that perspective is going around in the Caribbean also, but from this point of view, the question is being asked, is it PR? Are those companies simply engaging in PR? And if the Black Lives Matter campaign or movement does not become sustainable, will that conversation die out? Will they forget about it? Or who will ensure that there's follow-up? You know, so that conversation is going on. But we also have to look into ourselves in the Caribbean. And this is where scholar-activism comes in, because we're doing the research, we're giving lectures, we're having teachings, we're influencing the syllabus. We now have reparation on the syllabus of the Caribbean Advanced Proficiency Examination. We have revised, they use scholars, historians to help to revise the various syllabi. We have gone across the region, whether physically or COVID-19 has interrupted that march, but online we are there teaching children. The history department, the Department of History and Archaeology at Mona, the lecturers there are engaged. So the Caribbean is benefiting, and we're also engaging with the diaspora as much as we can, and as much as we're invited to share what is going on here and to have a conversation. But colonialism, the mentality, what people were taught, is so deep that don't think that everyone in the Caribbean is on board the reparation train, you see? Because there's a class divide in some cases, and the strategies are contested, the form or forms that reparation should take. There's no unity on that. And however, since 2013 and the heads of government have come on board, we are trying to hold them accountable because they are the ones who will have this conversation. But I am watching, and I'm also saying to myself, but the grassroots movement, maybe it's our best hope, because the negotiation from government to government, that's too slow. That's very slow. While that is happening, we have seen monuments coming down, statues falling, and people marching, while governments are having, political conversations. So, but we have an obstacle in the Caribbean, and even though the scholars are out there teaching, doing the research, sharing the research, and joining with grassroots activists, we realize, let me give you a practical example. There are monuments to colonizers in the Caribbean. None of them has come down. None has fallen. In my own country of Jamaica, for example, we have Columbus still standing in St. Anne's Bay, right in front of a school that's called Columbus Prep. and in the vicinity or in the same parish as a town called Discovery Bay. No, we reject of course, the discovery narrative. But by having Columbus still standing, by having only a few people thinking that he should come down, where streets and buildings and communities are named after enslavers. Brownstown in St. Anne is named after Hamilton Brown. Hamilton Brown was an enslaver, but people gave his name to that town. His grave is in the outside the Anglican church there in the burial spot. And the research that I have done as part of my PhD has shown, and I've published the book of thesis, is that he armed himself during the war led by Sam Sharp, the final Emancipation War, 1831-32. He had armed retainers, and he was part of the Colonial Church Union, the Anglican group that burnt down Baptist churches, because he blamed the Baptists for teaching some of the enslaved Africans that they were human beings who had the right to freedom. And then we have Queen Victoria in a park which is called St. William Grant Park. St. William Grant was one of those activists in the 1930s worker protests for the franchise and for the legalization of trade unions. So she's standing there, and there is no monument to St. William Grant, and then we have Governor Metcalfe, a colonial governor, who is standing there. Then you must have heard about the medal worn by the Governor General in Jamaica, which is a badge which is of the Order of St. Michael and St. George, with a white angel standing on the neck of a black man. The diplomats, the various high commissioners also have that badge. And what we learned after the British High Commissioner here to Jamaica was challenged is that his angel looks Asian. No, he's Asian. And what he wears has an Asian-looking angel, but he's still a black man. And all the governors general across the region wear this badge, and they didn't seem to think anything was wrong with it. So what I'm trying to say, in the midst of the Black Lives Matter movement, in the midst of statues falling in Europe, in the UK, in South Africa, and so on, in Leopold is gone in Belgium, and all of this. In the Caribbean, only in Trinidad and Tobago is there an active movement to take down Columbus. And even so, Columbus is still standing. What does that say about us? We have schools who have crests after colonizers because they were benefactors of the school, but there's nothing taught to the children about who those people were. Caleb Dickinson, Robert Monroe, who started Monroe College. And in fact, Caleb Dickinson and Robert Monroe have been reinterred in this upper class high school in St. Elizabeth. So what does that say about us? Some of us are calling for true iconographic decolonization. On the other hand, you have people who are, and influential people who are saying, if you take them down, how are children going to understand that part of their history? As if we need oppressors standing as icons to understand our history. So you see how far we still have to go to have unity in the movement.
I wanted to ask, right, in forms of people in Jamaica, because it was a place where, especially in the history, it's a place of different people from different places of the continent, and I've always tried to find the history of, as they would say, the Arawak Indians in Jamaica. Do they exist, or is it the replacement of what we call the Indo-Indians that came into Jamaica?
Sorry, I interrupted your question. Mm-hmm.
No, I just because I wanted to differentiate the two because the
Yes.
Ethiopians came in after, so
Yeah.
a lot of people will try to relate and not say that they have descendants of Indian, but to try and say that they come from the descendants of the Arawaks.
Yeah. Okay. So first of all, you know, we have been misnamed. That's the first thing.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
The colonizers, Columbus and his crew, they got lost. And, you know, it is something to me to think of somebody who didn't have a good sense of geography, who is still so celebrated. If it was any of our people, they would say, we were done, or something, right? But so they were searching for Asia, the East Indies.
Mm-hmm.
Got lost, landed in this part of the world. They were still convinced that they had reached where they were going, even though the indigenous people were telling them differently. So they called it the West Indies, and we got stuck with that name. But then it shifted to the Caribbean. But the name Caribbean is still racist because they call the indigenous people who are truly Kalinago and Garifuna, they call them Caribs. So then the region took the name of the so-called Caribs, who they call cannibals. People are Kalinago. So those people fought against colonization, and some of them survived. There was still indigenous genocide, but when eventually the people from Asia were brought here at the end of African enslavement to be indentured workers. So when the real Indians arrived, and they call them East Indians to distinguish them from West Indians. So we still, caught up in that vortex of myth and misnaming. The indigenous people of this region they represented a variety of nations, okay? So you had some Arawaks, but not in Jamaica. That was a mistake. Archaeologists have since corrected that. So the people here, the indigenous people here, were Tainos. That was their name. They spoke an Arawakan language, but they themselves were not like how Africans speak English, right? we're not English. So they spoke an Arawakan. But by 1655, that population had practically been decimated in Jamaica. You do have a small number of people who self-identify as Taino, okay? But for the most part, the people were decimated physically, the physical presence. We do have artifacts. We have evidence that they were here. And also remember, because they ran away into and formed themselves into Maroon communities and eventually mixed with African Maroons, Taino blood is also within the Maroon community. And then according to their culture and beliefs, their spirituality is around, so they haven't disappeared in the true sense of the word. But we have not memorialized them in the way we should. Some of us are saying Columbus's statue should come down. In its stead should be a monument to the indigenous people. We don't have a functioning museum of the indigenous people anymore. There used to be one in St. Catherine in a place called White Mall that has fallen into disrepair. But I went out there recently and I saw archaeologists excavating the graves. And it was very sad for me to look down into those graves to see the remains of our indigenous ancestors. But between the Spanish and the English, that population was practically wiped out. But in the rest of the Caribbean, in Suriname, in the Guyanas, in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, in Belize, in Dominica, in St. Lucia, you do have more active communities of indigenous people, the Kalinago and the Garifuna. The British tried to get rid of the Kalinago. In St. Vincent and the Grenadines, it's a horrible story of how they rounded up and put them on a boat, put them on an island, called Baliso. About 2,500 of them died. The rest got shipwrecked when they tried to leave, and a passing ship found them. That's how they ended up in Belize. There's Honduras at the time. Some of them want to go back to St. Vincent and the Grenadines. So there's an active movement there. But we do have indigenous people, but the Arawaks were not in Jamaica. They were in other parts like Puerto Rico. But Cuba had Taínos, so did Jamaica, and they used to trade together, you know. They had their own civilization. And we have artifacts to prove the wholeness of that civilization. But that community was practically decimated. So the Asian Indians were brought in. I refer to them as Indians, but indigenous people were not Indians. It was Columbus's mistake why they were called Indians. They were not Indians. They had their own names, like we have, you know, Ghanaians and Nigerians and so on. But the indigenous communities do exist. But Asians, the people we call Indians, the Indians from India, they were, Gladstone started it, Gladstone, you know, and he imported the first batch. And that continued from about the late 1830s to 1917. So a large number went back to India, but a significant number remained, multiplied, and now form significant populations of every Caribbean territory, every Caribbean country.
Okay.
But I want to make it clear that where Jamaica is concerned, and some of the other territories, to some of the other countries of the Caribbean, there was no shortage of labor. There's a view which has been made popular in some quarters that enslaved people did not want to work. The freed people, did not want to work. So after 1838 and full free, well, some were freed before that, African people just sat down. Carlyle has this graceful account of African people being lazy and, you know, sitting on the pumpkin tree, which means they didn't know what pumpkin looked like, how pumpkin grew. There is no pumpkin tree you can go sit under. Imagine crawling under a pumpkin vine to go and, you know, shade there. So they had this myth of the lazy African, the lazy freed African person. And so the planters didn't want the plantation economy to disappear, and lobbied for the importation of Asian. They were also Chinese indentured workers. Again, that's a myth that the Chinese came and they're natural business people. They came as indentured workers too. The first to Cuba and then to other parts of the Caribbean, including Jamaica. And then most of them, when their contract expired, or sometimes they bought out the remaining part of their contract, then they went into trades and so on. But African people had a hard time recreating their economies. And they brought in Indians to defeat the expectations of freedom. African people were willing to work, but they were not willing to work for pittance. So they were holding out for better wages, better conditions of labor, better contracts. And planters did not want to give any agency to or economic power to African people. So they brought in Indians to compete with Africans to flood the labor market and to depress wages. That's why they went for that. There was no actual shortage of labor. Maybe in a few countries, but certainly not in Jamaica, not in Barbados. Even Barbados was asking for labor. Never happened. And it didn't have that impact in Jamaica because they were never able to import enough to have that happen. And 1/3 of the Indians went back. But there's tension. There have always been tension. Not so much so in Jamaica, maybe in Guyana, Trinidad, and Suriname, where there are larger populations. But there's always been resentment because Indians came as contract workers. Some of them were deceived. So we talk about deceptive indentureship. But some of them, they tricked them into emigrating, especially the women. The conditions of labor were terrible. They didn't hold to the contract. And but at the end of their contract, they got land or money or repatriation. So when people say, how come Asians have come and they have managed to become upwardly mobile and they have land and they have businesses, what start did free Africans get? This is where we have to start. If you are not allowed to actualize your emancipation, and it's amazing what we have done without the ladder, you know, provided for us to climb up. We have done very well. And just as a historian, well, as someone who has written books on Africans and on Asians, this is what I'm trying to explain, that there's a context for the present inter-ethnic relationships in the Caribbean.
Brother Rich.
Yeah, peace and blessings to everybody. Peace to the sister for joining us. I've been listening intently into the conversation. Big up to our brother Dean, as always, for joining us and creating the links. You know, for me, the most important thing that I've heard you say that I just want to double down on is the fact that our histories are so interlinked, and that needs to be emphasized, because again, for us in the UK, a lot of our families are in the Caribbean. We travel back and forth a lot. So again, just making what's going on in the Caribbean something that is upfront in our minds here in the UK is something that I believe is very important.
And vice versa. I have families, members of my family there as well, and some of them are probably watching this. So I do have family there as well. Where I mean, my aunt was in the Windrush generation, you know. So so we are interested always in what goes on in the UK.
I know last year or the year before, there was a reparations link up with the reparations movement here, Sister Esther, and that. Is that something that's still carrying on?
Yes, and there's a relationship still. What we noticed though, I was part of that delegation. My brother Bert Samuels, who is a Pan-African attorney at law, and also one of your peers who now lives in Jamaica, Anthony Shpherd. He was a member of the House of Lords, but he lives in Jamaica. He is a reparationist and he's a QC. So we benefit from the position of the lawyers, what they can teach us. But what we noticed, and I think it's the same thing in everywhere we go, there's no united reparation movement in the UK either. Just like there's none, though they're trying to create one in the Caribbean. You have factions, and not all of them are supportive of the CARICOM Reparation Commission and the fact that governments have now intervened, you know. And I understand their position. I absolutely do. But, you know, I think we have to find common ground even within the disagreements. And I think that's what we're searching for. Sister Esther came to Jamaica, I think, 2018 or 2019. 2018, I think. And I was just on a Global African Congress reasoning Sunday, just last Sunday. Brother Glenroy was in that conversation, Sikaya Thomas from Canada. And I think we're all searching for common ground. And I think that's good. We have made trips to the continent of Africa, the different African countries, hoping also to have that link up and to talk to indigenous people in New Zealand and Australia. And we have links. The Center for Reparation Research, for example, we have an advisory board, which is made up of top scholars from around the world. But we have a network of friends, a network of scholars / friends. And we have people from right across the world in that network. So we are also trying to be, you know, a center that is inclusive and that makes use of all the ideas and knowledge out there right now. So we have to find a way to work together, regardless of the differences that we have, because a fractured people and disunited people, we're not going to reach anywhere.
Yeah.
Facts.
Because this is the reasons why we're having this conversation, is that like we have like a queen from Congo.
Yes.
Her name is Queen Diambi, and we are trying to create that unification as being one people, because she has the aspect of understanding the Europeans, the Americans, and as well as the African people and Caribbeans, because she's of mixed heritage. But she's been trained as a youth from Africa who went to America and able to get to understand the Americans in its perspective. So what we're able to do is to able to unify or to get people to come in together for the same common goal of our people. Because as I've always said, is that if we all come to get together, we can be that form of what we would call a Voltron, in that no matter what government we go against, if we come as a collective, it makes it more easier to break in that window.
Yes, we need to do this. We need to do this, and soon.
Yeah, so we are coming to Jamaica. We're just trying to find out what ways are we going to try and come in. It's only because of the COVID that the situation has arrived.
Yeah. Well, the chair of the CARICOM Reparation Commission, Professor Sir Hilary Beckles, who's also the Vice Chancellor of the University of the West Indies. I think you must have heard him speak on various occasions or picked up his videos. He has called for a summit. He's calling for a summit to be held in the UK, a 3-day summit. And I think he's seeking for that, unity, that unified approach to reparation. So that idea was just recently floated. So let's see where it goes, so that we can have a grand unification of our people against the common oppressor.
Yeah, because as I'll go into explaining this queen, every time she goes to certain places, they seem to want to crown her. Like she's now taken on control of Brazil, and she's now the queen of the Bantu people of Brazil. So they've opened up the doors, as well as in places like New Orleans. She's searching for our West African brothers and sisters across the board, wherever they're at, into able to unify and then bringing them all together as one people. But what I was going to go in the Caribbean. What do you find is your hardest challenges?
Okay.
In other like, as I said, to Caribbean islands.
The challenges towards a unified movement for reparatory justice, is that your question? Yeah,
and overall.
Overall. Well, of course, political tribalism is a problem, is a challenge right across. Where we inherited the Westminster system of government with party politics. But I think it's very intense in the Caribbean. In Jamaica, we have two major political parties, the Jamaican Labour Party and the People's National Party. And, over the years, elections have been, quite fractious. You have seen what's happening in Guyana now. You must be following that. That's concerning. Elections are coming up in Trinidad and Tobago. So I think political divisions, political tribalism is a challenge to unity. I think also the color issue is a problem in the Caribbean. Then there's the ethnic divide, more pronounced in some countries than others. And then there's the miseducation of too many of our people. In the Caribbean, even this morning on my show, I saw in the chat somebody asking, when are we going to talk about Africa's participation in the transatlantic trade in Africans? And it wasn't a question that was searching for knowledge and information and understanding. It was almost posed as an accusation. And it's one of the biggest obstacles in some countries to getting everyone on board, because there are people who are saying, why are you looking to Europe for reparation? You must look to Africa because, you know, in their view, Africans were the ones who sold us. Mm-hmm. So how to get our people to understand that Africans did not pioneer the trafficking, that they didn't capitalize it, that they didn't create the laws which made it, which some people say created the environment for that to take place, did not build the ships. There were no ships from Africa in the Thames, you know, owned by African people. They did not extract the resources to build the industries. And the net return to Africa, according to economic historians, is very low. So maybe some individuals and some chiefs participated and so on. But they are letting off the hook. People who hold that view are letting off the hook. The real culprits. Remember, you know, from the 16th and 17th centuries, you had a company, the company of royal adventurers trading to Africa. No, that's a brand. That's putting the royal family right in the mix. Then that was recapitalized and became the Royal African Company with some of the kings as participants and directors of the company. You know, you have universities in the UK now doing their research into their slavery past, and you have, you know, revelations now about some of those who were traders, and we have the database which shows who participated. So I think, but of course we can't run away from it. We have to teach. So because we are researchers and scholars who are disseminating, we have to teach. But no matter what we do, there are some people who will never be convinced, you know, and they know the history of opposition and resistance to the trafficking by African people. They don't know the extent to which, even on the ship, some were turned around because resistance continued all the way. So I think the curriculum, the education that people have received, and the failure to read the revisionist history, that might be a challenge. I think also, some of our governments are maybe concerned about bilateral agreements and so on, and what that would do if they, you know, put up this brave front for reparation. So there are many factors, and then there's, you know, the ethnic divide, and you have, you know, who is going to get the money, even though the CARICOM 10-point action plan, which is a strategy for reparation suggested, is a development plan. It is not a plan that will say every African person will get so much money, but it's a plan that will develop the Caribbean, because the Caribbean was left underdeveloped, and in some cases undeveloped, after Europe extracted wealth from our region, developed itself, and did not participate in the development of our region. So we have to try to overcome these obstacles and challenges.
But you know, one thing that, as I said, speak on this queen. She explained, informed of, when people talk about the people enslaving, the Africans enslaving and selling people off, where she says, she turns around and says, what happens to the mother that has lost her child, that will never able to see her child again?
That's right. So the resistance in Africa is not taught. Yes, I agree with her. Yeah.
Yeah. So she steps on that part of history.
Right. Right. Right.
Because there is a form of trauma that a mother is going from, and as well as a lot of people don't understand the actual history of what was happening in Africa, because it wasn't just the Europeans. There were others trying to enslave the West Africans as much as possible.
That's right. And also remember, that if you weaponize a country, if you weaponize a region, then you make resistance difficult. People would still resist, but the cost of resistance was high. And there is a book that I co-wrote with Professor Hilary Beckles called Trading Souls. I think if people read that book, they will get a better understanding of the unequal relationship between Europe and Africa during that period, the resistance that took place, the distress and the destruction and devastation across because of the fomenting of wars and the militarization of the region. And I think people also have to understand, and we talk about the narco trafficking all the time as a comparison. I don't know if you know of any international crime or any global international system of crime that doesn't have collaborators from local people. If you think of the narcotics trade, you will always have the big boys, but you also have those who are foot soldiers. So, and then my colleagues who research the World Wars and the Holocaust, the Jewish Holocaust, they also say that they were collaborators among those who we call the victims today. So that should not take away from our support for the movement. In fact, if you are able to corrupt local people into your dastardly project, then it magnifies the crime, in my view. And then there's the opposite. There's the argument that it was too long ago. Your former Prime Minister David Cameron, came here and said that the current UK High Commission to Jamaica has dismissed our demand, successive high commissioners and diplomats and politicians, apart from I think Jeremy Corbyn, they have not given sufficient attention. CARICOM even wrote letters explaining our situation and calling for a meeting to Europeans, the complicit states. And five of the six replied, but did not give any hope to our request. And no one agreed to meet. So there's that, and they will issue statements of regret, but they have stopped short of apologizing, because to issue an apology has three dimensions. You accept blame, you accept that you did something wrong, you commit to repair, and you commit to non-repetition. So if they apologize, they feel that it will have to be followed by an economic answer. And so that's also a challenge, for the movement.
Have you heard at this moment that, because I've been listening to and some of these companies and corporations that did the things that they were doing have come to admit to what they have done.
Yes.
And they want to engage. Has that reached Jamaica as
Oh yes, absolutely. Yes. We have had debates and discussions. In fact, you should look online for the webinar. It's from apology to action. And there was I moderated that conversation online where it was a press conference, really, a media engagement, looking at Lloyd's of London, looking at the pub chain, looking at the Bank of England, and Barclays Bank, the other financial institutions, and looking at the implications of their admission, and saying that we don't want a PR we don't want PR, we want action. And it has to go beyond confession now to reparation. But if they use the word apology, then they're legally obliged to continue with that towards reparation. So we're hoping to see what will happen, because Lloyd's of London, we have all the evidence, you know, of how they were involved. They insured, Lloyd's of London insured the slavers, the ships that carried our ancestors. And I'm thinking of two in particular. The Zong, I think everyone knows about the case of the Zong, way to Jamaica from West Africa, and 132 enslaved Africans were thrown overboard because they wanted to be able to be in a position to claim insurance rather than have the, you know, lose the cargo, quote unquote cargo. And Lord Mansfield was involved in that case, and so on. And then the George, the last ship we know of at this moment to arrive after the 1807 Act was passed. There were others, but the George to Jamaica seemed to have been the final one. So we do have the evidence of their participation, and if they are taking responsibility, then they have to go forward with reparation, which is why I was saying earlier that you in the UK shouldn't let this pass. You should follow this up. And remember, you know, if we're not careful, they will set the terms of reparation. You can't have that. You have to, the community in the UK must set the terms of reparation. They shouldn't be allowed to say, well, we will give you this or we'll give you that. It's not a handout, it's a right. So you have to start the negotiations. Yeah.
And just to continue from your point, you hit a very important nail on the head. And this is what has happened now with the Windrush generation, who were illegally kidnapped and terrorized by the state. The state has put their parameters to say, this is how we're going to compensate you. When does the rapist ever decide how the rape victim will receive justice? It's never done. And it's only based on the fact that we have failed to set up the infrastructures. So when I say this is a conversation that we can have online, it's merely so we won't alert them. But we are also, in terms of ADPAC, the African Diaspora Political Action Committee, setting up with barristers the ability to create joint civil litigations against the government, which are wholly determined by us. Now, every single legal case of any detriment is underwritten by insurance. And the previous Home Secretary, Javid, had put an estimation on the compensation at somewhere around 200 million. Now, the government don't get to decide that, but we would say as a minimum, the British government is liable for 200 million UK pounds sterling to the plaintiffs of the case. So all we have to do is pay the barristers the initial fee, identify an insurance underwriter to continue to pay the barristers, because we know that the success of the case is inevitable. We must take it from their hands, and we must take the power over that case.
Well, you should do that. Yes, do that in the name of Haiti. Remember that France did that to Haiti. Usually after a war at the treaty table, the victor sets the terms of
yes, absolutely.
But remember that after Haiti won its independence, it abolished slavery, it fought for its independence, established its independence, and then they threatened Haiti with invasion with an allied force, even though Haiti had successfully beat off allied forces before. They said you have to pay reparation. So that was a historic reparation. France, extracted that from Haiti. Haiti didn't finish paying that off until about 1947. So when people talk about, oh, Haiti is the poorest country, blah, 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 understand why Haiti.
There are reasons, absolutely.
And therefore, we shouldn't allow others to set the terms, because we understand pain and we must do the calculation because they benefited. I mean, my colleague historian who is looking at those who have the database, the University College London, they've done an amazing job to leave us the evidence. You just have to go to UCL to find out, you know, how what they got as compensation, which, by the way, they didn't finish paying off until 2015, as we discovered. And, you know, Black people in the UK have to pay off that loan. So, you know, doubly oppressed. So you have a right to reparatory justice, as do we at the scene of the crime, the greatest crime. So you have to, yes, I agree. Yes, we have to set the terms.
But you know, the one point, there is a caveat to that we can't intellectualize it, because if we intellectualize it based on law, that would be to presuppose that Europeans are decent, and they're not. So
that's why I said that the grassroots movement, is going to be more successful. Yeah. So
we must build out our own repertory courts and repertory banks to receive funds. However, we must also build out our own private security, which is a private militarized security, at the same rate as we grow our influence and our economics, because it must be backed up by something. So you know, these are things that we must do concurrently. And when we've seen the movement of the NFAC in the United States, we understand that we have tactical divisions. We understand their paramilitary capabilities. And we also understand that we can incorporate sovereign trusts at the drop of a hat, and that any of the directors or treasurers can also become sovereigns within that. Now, if you imagine an organization like Blackwater in the United States, which is a private paramilitary organization who literally subcontract contractors for hire, was good for the goose is good for the gander, and we can do exactly the same. And this is what keeps our entities secure. Again, not necessarily conversations to be had for the greater public and in the domain for public discourse, but definitely ones to be had at the board table at a level for us to be able to create strategy, tactics, and delivery around.
I wanted to go back to your question to me about the challenges. And I wanted to just mention, I know you're going to come to the end of this soon, but I wanted to mention 3 other arguments that have been posed. One is that the transatlantic trafficking and African enslavement were legal at the time, without any consideration about the fact that it wasn't legal in the UK at all. And research has shown that that argument can't stand up. In any event, that was without our consent, you know, who made the laws. Then the other argument is that you can't pay reparation for dead people. Now, the UK commissioner to Jamaica made that point on, and this is not taking any tales out of school or, you know, trying to say anything against the High Commissioner, because he said it on public television. So it's out there, the evidence is there. And he said, when he was asked about the responsibility of Britain, he said that, you know, they are focusing on modern day slavery and trying to eliminate that. And they're also, you know, having AIDS and low, you know, I mean, they're helping Jamaica and going forward with Jamaica, you know, with respect and so on. But when he was pressed, he said that, and I don't want to misquote him, but my understanding of the interview, of his response, was that they're not going to consider paying reparation for people dead and gone. But, and also that, yeah, well, so that was one. And also it's too long ago. It's too long ago in the past. But I think that and then there's this reluctance to declare the Maangamizi as a crime against humanity. But I think that has been done by the European, by an entity in Europe. At Durban, they didn't manage to get the states to agree to that. But I think that we understand that these were crimes against humanity. And once we understand that, there's no statute of limitation on a crime against humanity. And also in international law, from my understanding from my lawyer friends, is that they say there is nothing in international law to prevent the descendants of the victims from claiming reparation on behalf of their ancestors and also for the harm, the continuing harm. So there are obstacles, there are challenges, there are arguments coming out, you know, to defeat the movement, but we have to have resolve. And also there's a legal, you know, there are things we're doing, don't want to say publicly, but there are challenges that we're taking in the Caribbean to advance this movement.
Yeah. So again, just to continue on your point, you see, there are two ways of looking at this. You either say that they are crimes against humanity, or that you were dealing with cargo and commodities. So if you take the step that you were dealing with cargo and commodities, then we have to put it into the framework of man hours per person per day. Are you sure you want to have that argument around reparations for personnel? Let's call them commodities. You take this commodity who committed to a minimum of a 12-hour day, possibly 14, possibly 18-hour day, 7 days a week, times X amount of million for X amount of 100 years. Are you sure that is a commodity you want to put on the table?
Well, actually,
see, we can go both ways when it comes to reparations.
One of your colleagues has done that. Somebody in the UK has done that. Somebody from the who used to be at the University of Birmingham. Some years.
Yeah, this is my point.
Yeah, a calculation was made.
Dr. Kahindi Andrews.
Just your point.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Dr. Kahindi Andrews. So you can make a decision. So now human conversation.
Yeah.
Or the person, or the commodities conversation, because the commodities conversation can get a lot more expensive.
They didn't. Robert Beckford and the team. There was historians, actuaries, bankers. They got together some years ago. I think there's a documentary called "The Empire Pays Back," in which they explain that whole process. And what they did was to not to call them commodities, because you know it's uncomfortable to do that, but to look at what wages were like in the UK, let's say in the 17th, 18th century. They took a figure, not accurate, of the number of enslaved people, apply wages to those enslaved people, calculated interest, put pain and suffering on top of that, and so they came up with a pretty high figure, which is still an underestimation, because the wages they used was of the lowest category of laborer. But remember, under slavery, there were divisions. You know, there was the artisan and the tradeswomen would have to be paid. That would have to be a higher wage. The domestics, the field work. So yeah, but it was a start. But in other words, if you want to talk money, and if you're being, if you don't want to confront this and you want to monetize it, well, it's going to be a huge bill. But there are people who say don't do that because it's a be a harder road. What you're asking, you want to develop the Caribbean. Look at the COVID-19 situation now. It is quite clear who are the victims, who are suffering the most because of this. If you look in the Caribbean, right? If you free people without any recompense, if you agree to independence, you sign off on independence, but there's no package that is sustainable, that is dignified. People can't develop on what you left. Where the plantation started the environmental degradation, we have climate change, now we have this pandemic. It is showing the cracks in our infrastructure, which we could not maintain because no money, no adequate money was left at the moment of independence for those who are independent. So there's a conversation to be had, but that is why we're saying we're talking in terms of cleaning up the colonial mess. And
yes,
Europe has an obligation to come back and participate in the development, not giving aid or grants. You see, that's not reparation. And but if I think I saw the EU saying that for 40 odd years, this is what they have poured into the region. If they want to go that route, then we'll do the calculation, as you were saying. So
yeah,
they can't come out ahead if we do the calculation for 400 years of unpaid labor.
No,
no,
it's not possible.
No way. So I think they should participate in the development conversation. We need schools, more hospitals. Our infrastructure is under stress because of COVID, especially the health sector, you know?
But
so
do you know,
that's a conversation.
the point of reparatory courts.
Yeah,
but the point of reparatory courts and reparatory bank is to take it out of their hands. Because do you know, we have very civil conversations about what they want to do, and we must take it out of their hands. And when we have this conversation about the strategy which actually forces their hand, where we will be in the room for negotiation, you'll understand that it has nothing to do with their power or their choices, which is why it's very sensitive information that I wouldn't disclose over.
I understand that.
You understand.
There'll be other opportunities. You have to convene the kind
absolutely
of meeting that
which we will do.
Yeah.
However, I just wanted to make one more point, because you brought up a very pertinent point about COVID-19. COVID-19, make no mistake, irrespective of whether it was the Chinese, whether it was the US, or whichever intelligence service are using germ warfare as a tactic, which is an economic warfare, it doesn't matter. When you hear bullets hit the deck, protect your ass. That's just a basic self-preservation. What we must understand is that this is a realignment. Now, the financial tsunami was predicted to occur at this point. We just didn't know how it would happen. And that financial tsunami is about digitizing capital so that there's no more cash, because it takes away the controls. And within that, what we understood is whoever has the cryptocurrency will be the power and the glory come the hour, because you have autonomy of your currency. This that they have in Africa, the OKAIs, this has got nothing to do with us. This is, again, a European, and it's all about optics. It's about appearing for Africa to have power. But where we have our true power is in our own currency, which we do have within the Sable Ascent coin. Now, within that, we can transfer $500,000 US in one transaction with no permission. And it has an escrow facility so that goods are held in stasis on both ends of the blockchain until it's agreed, and then they would be released. So we have all of the sovereign banking facility that we need. It's now just a case of our sovereign jurisdictions granting themselves the banking license so that we can establish our reparatory banks in line with our reparatory courts. And you've got to take Israel and the case study of Israel and exactly what they did with their intelligence forces and their paramilitary forces to extrapolate this finance out of every nation that pays to them. Now, the United States, it was completely done by lobbying and putting Israeli interests into government and local authority to be able to extrapolate that finance, because the United States had nothing to do with their so-called Holocaust. And all of the countries that had to do with our Holocaust, it is about us positioning us where we are, backing us up. And this is the point of APAC. not only as a lobbying and advocacy organization, but also as a super PAC in order to get our people in position to be able to create the legislation that creates the environment that is fertile to release funds to our repertory courts of justice and banking institutions.
Well, I look forward to that conversation when you have your internal meeting to discuss that.
I was going to just say, I always want to give the introduction to the books that you have written, so people are aware of the work that you are doing within the community.
Okay. Well, I'll start with the books for schools because I think I'm most excited about being able to help in the re-education, of our young people. So I've written about 5 booklets and texts for schools, including the one I told you about, Trading Souls, published by Ian Randall. But all of these books are on Amazon, so people can go online and look for them. So Trading Souls and Saving Souls. So there's a companion volume. So Trading Souls and Saving Souls. There are subtitles, but once you look for Trading Souls and then Saving Souls, you will find those. Those were co-written with Professor Hilary Beckles because we kind of formed a collaborative relationship. I'm a trained teacher, and so and he's a senior scholar, not in age, but in terms of advancing in the field. So we formed a collaborative relationship so that the scholar could combine with the classroom teacher who has the language and the strategy to teach, and produce a few books. So those are 2. I did a booklet on emancipation and immigration for schools. Then I wrote Maharani's Misery, narratives of a passage from India to the Caribbean, looking at a woman on her journey on the island shore to Guyana, how she was raped and what happened and the court case and so on. Then I wrote a book. My first book was actually called Transients Settlers, the History of Indians in Jamaica, because I didn't grow up seeing many Indians around my community, but when I went to Trinidad, I was amazed. First trip. And I said, well, I'm going to come back to Jamaica and do some further investigation because I know Jamaica also participated and imported around 36,000 or more, 38,000 maybe, indentured workers. So I wrote Transients Settlers, which was published by People Tree Press in Leeds. And then there are 2 more. One is called Liberties Lost. And I don't know. Yeah, I do have them here.
Because we have we have an academy called Manhood Academy and Womanhood Academy of teaching the children the rites of passage. So these are kind of.
You can see this one. This is Liberties Lost, the first volume, which takes us from conquest to emancipation. It's published by Cambridge University Press and written by myself and Professor Beckles. And the companion volume is called Freedoms Won. So, cataloging our freedom journey, again, published by Cambridge University Press. So it should be available in the UK. Yeah? So there we are on the back there. Long time, photos. And I've written others, too numerous to have, I don't know, like maybe 16 books and 2 in the works.
I want to ask.
For the academic audience, the book that the academic audience should read, I think, which explains my journey and how I think. It's called I Want to Disturb My Neighbor. So that's you could look for. Here as well, if I could just quickly show this one. I Want to Disturb My Neighbor, this one. They could have a look at, yeah? Okay.
I was going to say, you know, the schooling system in Jamaica, in forms of the children, because we're trying to create some form of exchange program, and exchanging the children from Jamaica to come to England, and from the children from England to come into Jamaica. What kind of things would you say that you lot do in Jamaica at this precise moment? Or do you have that kind of idea of creating a African diaspora exchange program?
We're trying, there's a Center for Africa Caribbean Advocacy, and we're trying to establish those links with the continent. In terms of the UK, I think the movement has really been at the postgraduate and, you know, scholarly level. Like we go there and we do our PhDs, we come back. But in terms of secondary school, I don't think we have a vibrant exchange program. What I know is that there's a tendency for Caribbean parents to send their children back to Jamaica, Barbados, and so on, to go to primary school because they feel the education here is better for them. But no formal exchange. We do formal exchanges with university students rather than, you know, with the high school students.
We'll talk about that offline because I don't know if you received an email from me, but we're doing a Black History telethon, and we're trying to get as many people involved on the 15th and the 16th, 2 days before Marcus Garvey's birthday. So
yeah, I haven't had a chance to look at that, but I know we have the August 15th will be a very big day in Jamaica. You know that in the UK, in the US, they're calling for a reparation day with protests, right? And solidarity. So I think it's 12th of December movement working with Global African Congress. So, and then we have our own Marcus Garvey activities. So let's talk later on and see what
we'll do that.
Yeah.
Brother Rich.
I mean, listen, one thing I just want to make sure that the listening audience get from this, as always, is the fact that we need to know our story. Because I think key elements to the conversation that the sister mentioned was, one, the Haiti case, understanding how they reversed the reparations case on our brothers and sisters, you get me, to claim something that, again, for them wasn't due, but they used the headwork. So that's something that we need to know about, as well as the inherent link from insurance companies to ships. Because again, we always talk about the headliners of, you know, them being accountable for the things they've done, but the details are very obscure and very far and few between. A lot of us know these things. So I think in order to make this movement more real, that is definitely something we as individuals need to go away and investigate more. Because when we then talk about reparations, it becomes something we want to support.
Yeah.
Go on, my sister.
The evidence which we can share with you.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, that's what I want to impart, because again, as Brother Dean said, a lot of the conversation as far as plans go, we can't do online. We shouldn't do online. It's not for public consumption all the time. But understanding, as the people who are supporting the movement, exactly what the movement is about, what the goals are, what we're trying to achieve, that's our own personal responsibility as supporters. If you're saying you're a true supporter of reparations, these are the responsibilities you have to go and do, which is investigate exactly what it's about, rather than just living off of the broad strokes. Because again, that then it becomes a reactionary system where you hear certain lines that the brother and the sister may say, you react to it. But again, as far as having your heart fully immersed in the movement, it's never truly there, because the facts of the case have never really been uncovered. So again, I want to thank the sister and Dean once again for coming on and just hensing those points, especially because I think it's important. And it's important, again, to see this UK-USA, UK-Caribbean, UK-Africa link up, which is what Black Eyes TV always encourages. And for me, you know, I don't know how the sister feels about this, but this is something I think that at some point, all of the diasporan countries should aim to file some sort of paperwork or do something on a joint day. Because again, when we're being oppressed on a joint basis. So at some point, there should be one joint solidarity movement across the diaspora to signify our intent. I do believe that should happen. How do you feel about that, sister?
I think that there are other people talking about this as well. They're trying to decide on a date that would have buy-in from everyone, but that internal conversation is going on, and there are several dates which have been put out there. Because what people are saying is that all these international days have been imposed on us, whether by the United Nations or some other country. And we have not decided on a day for ourselves. And so the discussions are going on about what that day could be. Well, you know that UNESCO has selected August 23rd, because that was the date of the Boy Caiman in Haiti just before the start, or the signaling of the start of the Haitian Revolution. So UNESCO did that, and people were supporting that date because in solidarity with Haiti. But then comes the bicentennial in 2007, when Britain was celebrating the fact that it passed the Abolition Act to end the transatlantic trafficking in enslaved Africans, not slavery, but the trafficking. And that was March 25, 1807. And so that went to the United Nations apparently. And then we have this day as an international day. But not many people in the Caribbean are warming to that date. Then there's August 1, which is Emancipation Day in the Caribbean. But because emancipation took place at different dates in different parts of the world, there's a search going on for another date, which would include the indigenous people, for example, you know? So conversation, we just need to agree. But I think people, if they had to choose one day, if they had to choose March 25 versus August 23, most people would choose August 23. The only reason Jamaica got involved in 2007 is that we felt that if we did nothing, if we didn't have a committee to engage in public discussions around the bicentennial, the narrative of the UK would infiltrate Jamaica, and that would have become So I know we were criticized for even paying any attention to it, but we know our society better than a lot of people, and we know if we didn't have a voice in it to turn the narrative on its head, the UK narrative, the Wilberforce mania, would have reached Jamaica. So again, we lobbied our Prime Minister at the time, Most Honorable P.J. Patterson. He established a bicentennial committee, and if I was chair, we carefully picked the people to be on that committee. And we published a booklet called Freedom Delayed. So to turn the narrative on its head and to celebrate our own icons, the people with boots on the ground on this side, and also like Equiano and Sancho, who are Black abolitionists. And not just for the end of the trafficking, but for slavery in general. So that's how March 25 came about, you know, and at the UN every March 25 they have this. But to me, that's only for the British colonized Caribbean. We need a day that will resonate with the entire Black and Indigenous community.
Go on, Dean.
Within the fortnight, we will offer all of those repertory organizations the ability to use our internal communications tool. And that way we know that we have a secure line on a Black-owned server where we have our own communication tool, where we know that we have communication security, where we can edit documents concurrently with permission sets and then be able to share those internally, where we do have an agreement, which is for a day that isn't just for optics, but for function, where everybody is agreed that that is the day where this unique set of circumstances that I'm talking about, where they will desire to bring us in a room to negotiate, will serve them, not us. It will serve their security.
Okay.
All right.
Facts. Listen, before you just wrap up, let me just say to the audience that's listening, big up to everybody who supported today as always and commented in the chat. Please don't forget to hit that like button if you enjoyed the information that you heard today. Yeah, it's free. It means very little to you. It should take no time at all. So please show love and help the video to be spread easily by hitting that like button and sharing it out. Because again, the information that we've talked about is very important and it's very key. And if, for those people who regularly tune in, and for those who know, as I said, we've got a series of shows now that we're starting to build up with our brother Dean joining us each time, where we're creating pieces to a big jigsaw puzzle of reparations and repatriation, more importantly, because that's an ongoing thing that we talk about here for our brothers and sisters that understand it's not about staying here in England or in some of these spots in the diaspora and in the USA. You understand? Because again, we need a clear plan and a mind state towards that movement. And it's very much integrated with the reparations movement. You understand? So please, I encourage people, go back, look at the other shows that we've done, especially just look for our brother Dean in the title, and you will see that jigsaw puzzle slowly coming together as we create these links. And hopefully, as Terry said, when we do our telephone and we have multiple people on, again, more pieces of that jigsaw puzzle will become apparent in what we're trying to build towards, you understand? But again, it's a mind state as well as practical movements. And that's what we've tried to show this evening. So to everyone who's tuned in so far and joined us, big up to you every time. Look out for even more. I would hope as well, Terry, that we try to encourage a sister to maybe join the International Sister Circle, because I know she's got a wealth of knowledge and that she can impart to the sisters on that side of the game. But I'll let Terry close out. Thank you again, sister, for joining us on the platform. Much appreciated for Black Eyes TV. Dean, as always, it's been a pleasure. You understand? Thank you very much for joining us as always and giving your time. I know you're always busy and buzzing around the community, but thanks for making yourself accessible. Riggsy?
Yeah.
Go through.
As Brother Rich was speaking, we have different facets and different departments in everything that we try to do into collaborating. Because as we have this campaign that we're doing right now, which is Black Family First, in understanding that we have to go right to its core. To making a nation is to creating a family. That family is where they break up and we disfranchise ourselves into not being that nation. So when we talk about that, we're talking about our men, we're talking about our women, we're talking about our children. We all need healing regardless, because we're all going through some forms of psychological traumas in different ways, but it's all the same trauma. So in what we were talking about, the International Sister Circle is galvanizing the women together and able to push their narrative into the directions of where they need to go and what they need to do. Like tomorrow, they have a big, massive event tomorrow with a lady, with one of our elder ladies called Queen Afua, and they're going to be talking about Planet Hill and talking about traumas and how the women can put their roles into place. So that is tomorrow at 3 p.m. UK time, 10 p.m. EST time. So we're trying to push that narrative. Then, as I was saying earlier on, we have for the children, we have the Manhood and Womanhood Academy, which they did a little thing they did earlier on today, but we're trying to push that. We're looking for ambassadors to push in the narrative, because as Dean is here as well, is that we're trying to create these establishments, but at the same time, we're trying to create an exchange program, which is to have all the different facets of different areas, different communities engaging with each other. And then when they get to a certain age, they're able to go to Africa, like in going to Congo, and to able to do a rites of passage. So they can say they've got brothers in England, they've got brothers in anywhere in Europe, they've got brothers in the Caribbean, they've got brothers in the South America, they've got brothers in America. So they've already engaged, so they know each other. Mm-hmm. So by the time they move to doing that rites of passage, then it gives them the obligation to get in the brightest and the best ones out of them to able to push in the next step, you know. So this is what we're trying to do with the children. And then at the same time, as I said, the men have to show stances in forms of the men have to do the rites of passage, because many of us haven't, because the reason being is that we've been taken away from our mothers, and now we're on lands that we don't know. So we're following a rites of passage that has got nothing to do with our culture. So it's just besides doing business, economics, and doing the men things that they need to do, they need to go into their forms of healing and doing their forms of rites of passage before they can even come to a negotiation table. Because, you know, how can you have a sick man trying to deliver economics to you? How can you have a sick man trying to teach your children? How can you have a sick man trying to cook or do agriculture for you? They need healing. So we need to show the youth what we can do as elders and show them the way so that they can take that mantle and pass it on. So then that's where you unite the whole family. And once we're able to do that, is that we're able to push in that narrative forward. So in saying so, you know, a lot of the stuff has to be talked behind the scenes, as we normally would say. We're going to close out, family. Everyone stay behind that's on the panel while we go through the advert. But please check out internationalsistercircle.com. Check adpac.org. Manhood Academy of
my brother.
.net, that's it. Adpac.net and Man Academy, is it .net? And then
.net, yeah.
And then manhoodacademyofficial.com. So family, as I always say, you know, sometimes we have to think of all the stuff that we have done today, the day before, go into the archives, enjoy what you see, and you know, share it amongst the family. And we'll be back tomorrow at 3 p.m. Peace.
Peace, family.